At the will, reading the sound that struck hardest wasn't the lawyer's voice. It was my parents laughing as they handed my sister a check worth more than most houses. Then a single dollar slid toward me, crisp and mocking. My father didn't blink when he said, "Go earn your own." My mother smirked, almost pleased with herself. Some kids just don't measure up. No one disagreed, not even my sister. I stayed silent, my hands still on the table, while the lawyer hesitated over a sealed letter. My grandfather left, only for me, pausing just long enough to make my mother's smile falter. I used to think silence was just something rooms had when people stepped out of them. Growing up, I learned it could sit beside you, even when the whole family was at the table, filling plates, pouring water, passing dishes over your hands as if you weren't there. At 8, I learned how invisibility worked. It wasn't that no one saw you, it was that they pretended not to. I remember one afternoon in late fall, the same kind of cold light that would later spill across that will reading table. My mother was arranging trophies on the living room shelf, polishing each brass plate with the sleeve of her sweater. All of them belonged to Liana debate medals, piano competition awards, a glass plaque with her name etched in sharp serif letters. My own project ribbon, a blue strip I earned at a county science fair, sat folded on the corner of a side table. No frame, no polish. By the end of the evening, it wasn't there anymore. My father always said things like, "Focus on real achievements," while tapping Liana's shoulder, telling her which internships she'd get, which schools would take her. He spoke to me differently, less like a daughter, more like a placeholder, the one expected to manage the things no one else wanted. Walking the dog, cleaning the yard, returning forgotten items. "You're steady, Julia," he said once, as though steadiness was a consolation prize. But the only person who didn't talk to me that way was my grandfather Walter. His voice was slow, patient, as if he were letting me decide whether his questions deserved answers. He'd take me to the lake house on weekends, the scent of old wood and the quiet thrum of water against the dock settling into my bones. He kept 2 fishing rods, one new one carved with his initials, and always handed me the carved one. People pay attention to the wrong things, he told me. They look at the surface, not the pull underneath. Those afternoons were the only time I felt seen. We'd sit with our lines in the water, letting the wind shift the reflections. He never asked why I was so quiet. He already understood. Once he nudged his chin toward a bird perched on the railing, its feathers ruffled by the breeze. "Watch long enough," he said, "and you notice what others miss." I didn't realize it then, but he was giving me the very skill my family lacked, the ability to read between actions, to track truth in the smallest details. One winter break, when Liana won another award, my parents threw a dinner. Friends filled the house with bright voices and heavy perfumes. I stood in the hallway carrying coats to the back room. As I passed the dining table, I heard my mother laugh softly, the same way she did at the will reading years later. "Julia's fine," she told a guest. "She doesn't need much." That sentence stayed with me longer than any argument could have. It was the moment I understood that in this family, needing nothing meant deserving nothing. It wasn't cruelty, they simply believed their own story about who deserved what. I went back to the lake house the next morning. My grandfather was already at the dock sorting through tackle boxes. When he saw me, he didn't ask why I'd come early. He just handed me the carved rod and waited until I sat beside him. The water was still, the air cold, the world honest in a way home never was. That was the day I learned my place in the Hartman family, and the day I realized I would eventually have to choose whether to stay in it. The morning after the will reading, the house felt wrong. Too bright, too busy. My parents moving through the lake house like surveyors, opening drawers, lifting framed photos, talking numbers as if grief were an accounting category. I stood near the window watching frost melt along the deck rail, trying to quiet the echo of their laughter from the day before. Liana drifted in with a mug she didn't drink from. She hovered beside me like she wanted to say something meaningful, but couldn't risk choosing the wrong words. It was a shock for all of us, she murmured, eyes fixed on her reflection in the glass. "Not me, us." Even in comfort, she centered herself. My father entered next, carrying a stack of folders from my grandfather's office. He set them on the table and thumbed through the pages with the casual ownership of someone convinced they deserved everything. "We'll sort this," he said, meaning they would. His gaze skimmed past me the way one glances past a coat rack. "Your sister will handle most of the responsibilities." My mother followed behind him, sorting envelopes, humming a tune I couldn't place. When she reached the small pile left for me, just the dollar, the sealed letter and a key, she paused long enough for the silence to thicken. Then, without looking up, she delivered the line that locked everything into place. "Go earn your own. No heat, no hesitation, just a verdict." Liana shifted her weight, uneasy. My father pretended to reread a document. The only sound was the distant creak of the dock settling into the cold water outside. I didn't respond. My hand tightened around the sealed envelope, its weight suddenly heavier than everything they'd claimed for themselves. For the first time, I realized they weren't overlooking me, they were erasing me, and they expected me to let them. I left the lake house before anyone noticed. No door slam, no goodbye, just the soft click of the latch behind me. The air outside carried a thin edge of winter, sharp enough to keep me steady as I walked to my car. I set the sealed envelope on the passenger seat and drove toward town, the trees blurring into one muted line. Every mile loosened the grip of their voices. At the small inn near the ridge, a place my grandfather and I once stopped for hot chocolate, I checked in without giving a reason. The owner, Rosa, recognized my name but didn't ask questions. She handed me a key and pointed to a quiet corner room. A gift, really, 4 walls that didn't demand anything from me. Inside, I set my notebook on the desk and finally opened the envelope. A key. A short letter in my grandfather's handwriting, a set of numbers and one line underneath. Start where the truth was first bent. No instructions beyond that. No explanation. Just enough to pull me into the dark corners he'd always hinted at, the places where appearances had replaced honesty in our family long before I understood the cost. I read the letter 3 more times, tracing each loop of his pen. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the numbers down. I ran them through every pattern I could think of, dates, entries, valuations. Eventually, the columns aligned in a way that made sense only if you knew why someone would hide certain payments and inflate others. And I did. I powered on my laptop and began the work I knew best, quiet, methodical, precise. I checked archived documents tied to my grandfather's old company. I compared notes with public filings. I mapped the flow of payments that never matched the official timeline. When something didn't align, I color-coded it. When something repeated, I boxed it in red. Hours passed like minutes. No fury, no tears, just clarity. The truth wasn't hiding. It was sitting in plain view, waiting for someone who wasn't invested in the illusion to actually look. By late afternoon, the notebook was half filled. Patterns emerged. So did motives. A particular set of payments, rounded amounts, always just below thresholds that would trigger review, appeared again and again under a shell entity my father once advised. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of it settle. Not surprise, not even disappointment, just confirmation of what silence had been whispering through the years. I drew a line on a fresh page. Then I began assembling a timeline, dates, locations, signatures, inconsistencies, everything grounded in public record or the materials my grandfather had tucked away in his study. No accusations, no speculation, only facts arranged cleanly enough that they spoke without interpretation. I didn't need to fight them. The truth could do that on its own. When the sun dipped behind the hills, I took out the second item from the envelope, the key. I knew exactly which door it belonged to, the locked cabinet beneath his desk. The one he always touched before leaving the study, a habit I'd filed away years ago without understanding. I closed my notebook and slid it into my bag. Then I drove back to the lake house, arriving after twilight. Their cars were still there, positioned neatly like pieces on a board. I moved quietly, my steps absorbed by the damp wooden planks. Inside, the house was dim. A few lights glowed in the hallway. Laughter drifted from the living room, thin, uneasy, forced. They were talking about investment projections. Even now, still hungry, I slipped into the study without being seen. The air inside was still holding the faint scent of old books and cedar. The desk lamp cast a soft circle of light around the locked cabinet. I knelt and fitted the key into the metal slot. It clicked open with a sound that felt final. Inside were binders thin, labeled only by years. A stack of notes in my grandfather's handwriting. a small recording device, a few printed emails, and a single envelope addressed to me sealed with the same care as the first. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I sorted through the binders. Page after page confirmed what I had already traced my parents' fingerprints on decisions that stripped him of control in ways he never publicly admitted. Rounded payments, notes written in my father's legal phrasing, a pattern of advice that didn't match the outcomes. I scanned what mattered and stored the digital copies in a cloud folder, then backed them up twice. Simple, professional, clean. In the corner of the study was a camera so small it blended into the wood frame of the bookshelf. I hadn't noticed it before, but my grandfather's letter had said everything I needed to understand truth is only effective when the right people see it. The lake house recorded everything, their actions, their words, their intent. I stood slowly, letting the realization settle like dust in a quiet room. This wasn't revenge. This was administration carried out by a system he built, now placed in my hands. I closed the cabinet, locked it again, and slipped the key into my pocket. No need to announce anything. Not yet. As I stepped back into the hallway, I heard my mother's voice rise crisp and certain. Julia will stay out of this. She never had the mind for complex matters. I paused, unseen. Their voices filled the house, confident in their assumptions, unaware that the walls were finally listening. I turned away, steady and silent. This time I wasn't here to be included. I was here to finish what he started. Morning light slid across the lake house floor in a thin, cold line when I returned. My parents were already dressed too formal for the hour, too composed for what they believed was still under their control. Liana hovered nearby, twisting the edge of her sleeve. When the knock sounded, all three straightened as if bracing for applause. It was only Mr. Boone, my grandfather's longtime friend. He stepped inside quietly, carrying a folder and a small device. He nodded at me first, then at the others. No greeting. My mother's smile tightened. "Is this necessary?" He didn't answer. He simply placed the folder on the table and pressed a button on the device. The room filled with the soft click of an audio file starting. Then came my grandfather's voice, steady, unmistakable, recorded in the same study where my parents had spent yesterday tearing through his things. If this is being heard, it means the conditions have been met. My father shifted, caught off balance. My mother's expression stayed rigid. Grandpa continued. "I trusted the people closest to me to handle my work with integrity. Some did not. So I left instructions to ensure the truth would be seen clearly without debate." A second click. Footage appeared on the small screen, my parents in the study, opening drawers, discarding photos, evaluating items like inventory. Their voices carried plainly talk of property value, leverage, entitlement. My mother stepped forward. "This is taken out of context." Mr. Boone raised a hand. Silence. Another clip followed, this time records projected onto the screen. Payments, notes, rounded numbers. The same anomalies I had circled in my notebook. My father's initials appeared more than once. My mother's signature on advisory memos she had always claimed were routine. My father exhaled sharply. "Old paperwork. Misinterpreted. This doesn't prove any—" The recording shifted again. My grandfather's voice returned softer, now edged with weariness. "Julia, if you're hearing this, you have already seen what they hoped would never be found. The will reading was not the end, it was the beginning. Everything that comes next relies on what you choose to do with truth that was buried." My mother's composure cracked. A flash of panic cut through her eyes. "Julia, stop this. You don't understand how these things work." But I didn't say a word. Mr. Boone opened the folder, sliding out a set of documents clean official signed long before my grandfather died. "These are the final directives," he said. "Your father and mother retain the properties assigned to them. Your sister retains her trust. But the remainder of the estate, including the controlling interest in your grandfather's research foundation, transfers to Julia alone." My father stood. "Absolutely not. This can be contested." "It can," Boone said calmly. "But if contested, every asset defaults to the foundation in full." That was Walter's stipulation. There is also a clause regarding possible legal review of past advisory work. You know which work he meant. The room quieted. My mother's breath hitched. Liana stared at the floor, cheeks pale. I stepped forward not to speak but to place the key from the locked cabinet onto the table. A small sound barely audible. My mother flinched as if it were a gavel. Boone met my eyes. All that's left is acknowledgement. I nodded once. No anger, no victory cry, just the clean click of something falling into place. My parents said nothing, not because they agreed, but because they finally understood there was nothing left to argue. Behind them, the lake outside the window stayed still. The dock didn't creak. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. The reversal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I stayed behind after everyone left, letting the lake house settle back into its natural quiet. The air inside still carried the faint smell of cedar and old paper, my grandfather's trace untouched by the storm that had just passed through. I stood by his desk, fingertips resting on the worn edge, the same place he used to tap when he was thinking. Now it felt like a boundary line I'd finally stepped over. Outside, the water barely moved. A thin layer of mist hovered above it, rising and fading in slow breaths. I opened the door and walked to the dock boards cool under my feet, the same boards I had sat on as a child, with a simple need to understand the world. Back then, Grandpa would point at the quiet surface and say, "Still water tells the truth if you know how to listen." For the first time in months, I listened. No echoes of my mother's voice, no sharp corrections from my father, no strained smiles from my sister. Just the soft lap of the lake and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I didn't replay what had happened inside. I didn't wonder whether they felt guilt or loss. Their reactions were no longer mine to carry. The documents, the recordings, the truth, they had done their work. What remained belonged to me alone. The sun pushed through a break in the clouds, laying a thin gold stripe across the water. I watched it stretch toward me, warm and patient, like an invitation. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I sat on the edge of the dock, letting my feet hover above the surface. The cold air touched my skin lightly, almost gently, as if the lake itself recognized the shift. For the first time, I felt the beginning not of justice, but of freedom. In the end, it wasn't the documents or the recordings that changed anything. It was the silence that followed, the kind that settles only when truth is no longer questioned. Some endings arrive quietly, some freedoms too. I stepped back from the dock knowing this time the quiet belonged to me. If this story stayed with you, linger a moment, breathe, and stay close. More quiet truths wait for the ones who listen. At my sister's birthday party, my father grabbed a microphone and made an announcement that froze every smile in the room. Tonight, he said, our successful daughter, Venus, is giving her penthouse to her sister Tara. 30 guests clapped like it was generosity, not humiliation. I stood there, heart hammering, the keys still cold in my hand. My mother's eyes dared me to obey. My father's grin told me I had no choice. And when I said no, the sound of his hand cracked through the music. My earring hit the marble floor and rolled away. That slap shattered everything, including whatever bond we still had left. The night had started like any other Carter family celebration, loud, polished, and painfully rehearsed. The house gleamed under chandeliers, the marble floors catching reflections of gold dresses and half-finished wine glasses. A string quartet played near the windows overlooking Atlanta's skyline. From the outside, it was perfect. Inside it, felt like a stage where I never got the right lines. 2 hours before that slap, I'd arrived with a bottle of vintage wine and a polite smile. My mother barely looked up. "Oh, good, Venus, just put it on the bar," she said, fussing over the dessert table where my sister Tara stood, surrounded by friends. Tara laughed loud, the kind of laugh that filled a room and demanded attention. Her fiancé, Ethan, leaned in to whisper something, and she swatted his arm playfully, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "You look tired," Mom added without turning around. "You work too much." "I lead a company," Mom, I replied softly. "It's supposed to be work." She hummed, distracted. "You should think about balance. Maybe help your sister get back on her feet. She's been struggling." That word struggling had become the family's excuse for everything Tara did. For years, she'd floated from one failed project to another, cushioned by my parents' endless support. Meanwhile, every time I achieved something, the applause was muted, followed by reminders to stay humble. I greeted relatives and family friends, the usual crowd who thought they knew us. Aunt Nancy pinched my cheek, still treating me like I was 12. "Still single?" she asked with a smirk. "All those degrees, all that success." "But no man yet," I smiled thinly. "No, Aunt Nancy, no man yet." Her husband, Uncle George, raised his glass. "Maybe if you stopped being so intimidating, sweetheart. Men don't like that." Their laughter scraped my nerves. I found a quiet corner near the bar, pretending to check emails. Across the room, Tara basked in compliments. "She's such a free spirit," someone said, "not tied down like Venus." "Yeah, another added money isn't everything." I sipped my wine and swallowed the bitterness burning up my throat. Dad moved through the room like a politician, shaking hands, grinning wide. He'd built his success on charm and control. When he finally reached me, his hand landed heavy on my shoulder. "You proud of your sister tonight?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Of course." He leaned closer. "You've done well for yourself. Maybe it's time you shared that good fortune. Family takes care of family." His tone wasn't a suggestion. It was a command wrapped in affection. I nodded, pretending to listen as he walked away to refill his drink. My pulse quickened. There was something in his voice, final rehearsed dangerous. The music swelled. People gathered for a toast, and I caught Tara's eyes. She looked almost nervous, almost guilty. Then Dad raised the microphone, and I knew. The night was about to turn into something none of us would forget. The sound of the microphone feedback cut through the laughter like a knife. Conversations stopped, glasses lowered. My father stood in the center of the room, his posture proud, his voice dripping with performance. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate family generosity and the bond that keeps us strong." I already hated where it was going. I'd seen that gleam in his eyes before, right before he announced something that benefited everyone but me. He turned toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And what better way to show that bond than a gift from one sister to another? Our hardworking Venus has decided to give her penthouse to her sister Tara. The room erupted in applause and gasps. Some clapped out of shock, others because that's what you did when the patriarch told you to. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "That's incredible!" I froze, glass still in my hand, my smile stiff. For a second I thought I'd misheard, but then Tara covered her mouth in mock surprise. "Dad really," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye, whispering, "This is so beautiful." My stomach twisted. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting for me to nod and play along. My father extended his hand expectantly, his palm open like a demand. "Come on, sweetheart," he said into the mic. "It's only fair. Your sister's been struggling. You can always buy another one." Something in me snapped. The years of silence, of smiling through their favoritism, of writing checks and never being thanked, they all collided in that moment. I set my wine glass down, the stem trembling slightly in my fingers. "No," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. The sound sliced through the applause like glass shattering. My father blinked, confused at first, as if the word didn't register. "What did you say?" I straightened my back, the weight lifting off my shoulders with every syllable. I said, "No. I'm not giving away my home." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Aunt Nancy's mouth dropped open. Uncle George muttered, "Ungrateful." My mother's voice cut through them. "Venus, don't do this. You're embarrassing us." I turned to her. "I've supported this family for years. I paid for half of this party, the wine, the chef, everything. But this is mine." Tara's eyes glistened fake tears. "Venus, please, it's not like that." But it was exactly like that. My father's smile vanished. His jaw locked tight, microphone still in hand. "You're defying me," he said. Stepping closer, his voice dropped low, but the room was so quiet everyone heard it. Before I could move, his hand came fast and hard. The sound echoed. My head snapped to the side, my skin burning. My earring flew off, rolling across the marble floor until it hit the leg of a chair. The room gasped in unison. No one moved. Not a single person stepped in. I straightened slowly, touched my cheek, and looked at him. He waited for me to crumble to cry to apologize. Instead, I picked up my earring and whispered, "Happy birthday, Tara." Then I walked away. The hallway outside the banquet room was colder, quieter, like the air itself refused to carry the noise from inside. My cheeks still burned my skin hot against the chill marble. I pressed my hand to it, half expecting to see his fingerprints branded there. Behind the closed doors, the music had started again, a desperate attempt to pretend nothing happened. That was my family turning shame into background noise. I walked faster, heels striking the floor in steady rhythm. I wasn't running. I was done running. In the reflection of a glass console, I caught my face. Calm, detached eyes hard. That calm scared me more than the slap, because it meant something inside me had gone still, like a lake right before a storm. I reached into my clutch and took out my phone. One tap. That's all it took. A single button glowing blue. I stared at the screen for a second, then locked it. No one inside knew what that button meant, but I did. It wasn't rage driving me. It was precision. Months ago, my best friend Kayla had warned me, if they cross that line again, don't argue. Just call her. Grandma's the only one they fear. At the time, I'd laughed. I can handle them. Kayla had just looked at me and said quietly, handling isn't the same as being free. Now her words echoed as I walked down the hallway. The string quartet's song faded, replaced by muffled voices. My heels clicked like a countdown. I stopped by a floor-to-ceiling window. Atlanta's skyline shimmered beyond the glass, all those towers glowing indifferent. Somewhere out there was my penthouse, the one they tried to strip from me with applause. My reflection stared back, half in light, half in shadow. The elevator chimed. I stepped inside, pressed the lobby button, and watched the doors close. My pulse slowed. Every floor that passed was another layer of control sliding back into place. In the lobby, the air smelled like white lilies and expensive perfume. I leaned against the marble wall and exhaled for the first time. A text buzzed on my screen. On my way. I typed one word back. Then I turned my phone face down, slipped it back into my clutch, and walked toward the glass doors. Outside, the summer night was still warm, but I felt nothing. As I crossed the driveway, headlights swept over the entrance. A black sedan pulled up and a woman stepped out. Tall, composed hair silver under the lights. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I nodded once. She nodded back. Inside, laughter still spilled faintly from the windows. In 30 minutes, that laughter would stop. And when it did, everyone in that room would finally understand what happens when you try to humiliate the wrong daughter. The quartet was still playing when the doors opened, but every note felt hollow. The woman in silver hair walked in heels, clicking like a countdown. Conversations froze mid-sentence. "Daniel Carter," she said evenly. "Explain why you laid a hand on your daughter." My father lowered the microphone, color draining from his face. "Mother, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what I should think," Margaret replied. Her cane struck the floor once. "You humiliated Venus. You demanded her home like she was an ATM. Her eyes swept the guests, and every one of you applauded. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the quartet stopped. My mother stammered, "Mom, please, it was a misunderstanding." "Be careful with that word," Margaret said. "You've used it to justify cruelty for years." My father straightened his tie. It was family business. She overreacted. I stepped out from the doorway. I said no, I told him. "That's not overreacting. That's setting a boundary." Margaret turned toward me, but didn't interrupt. She just raised her chin and declared, "You have 5 minutes to find her earring." A gasp rippled through the room. Tara dropped to her knees instantly, her gown dragging across the marble. Guests shifted, unsure whether to help or hide. My father's jaw twitched, eyes darting between his mother and the crowd filming him. "Mother, this isn't necessary," he said, voice rising. "It's absolutely necessary," she replied. "When a man strikes a woman, he kneels to pick up what he knocked down." No one moved. Even the air seemed to wait. Tara crawled a few steps, searching beneath tables. Her mascara streaked down her face. My mother whispered her name, but didn't dare move closer. Phones were up now, every angle, every second streaming online. "Enough," Margaret said. "Stand up, all of you. This family has mistaken obedience for respect long enough." She faced my father directly. "You run a company, Daniel, not a kingdom, and as of this moment, you run neither." He blinked. "What are you saying? I'm rewriting my will tonight. My estate, my accounts, everything goes to Venus." Shock rippled like wind through glass. My mother gasped. Tara froze. "That's insane," my father barked. "You can't, I can, and I will." Her voice didn't rise. It only sharpened. You embarrassed me. You broke your daughter's dignity in public. You will live with that mirror." He tried to laugh, but it cracked in his throat. "You'll regret this." Margaret turned to the crowd. "You've all seen enough. Remember what you witnessed." Then she looked at me. "Do you have the earring?" I nodded and opened my clutch. The pearl rested in my palm, small but radiant under the chandelier. I walked to the center of the room and set it on the table. "There it is," I said quietly. No one spoke. My father looked at it like a bomb. My mother's hands trembled over her chest. Tara stared, eyes glassy. Margaret's gaze softened just slightly. "Venus, she said you owe them nothing. Take your things and go." I exhaled slowly, like releasing years of air I'd been holding. "Thank you." I turned to my father. "You wanted obedience. You got silence instead. I hope it echoes." He took a step forward, desperate. "We can fix this," he said. "You're still my daughter." I met his eyes. "Not tonight." Then I looked at Tara. "You could have told him no. You always could have." She swallowed, speechless. Margaret tapped her cane once more. "The party is over." Guests began to scatter, murmuring apologies and excuses. The quartet packed their instruments quickly. Even the air conditioning sounded like it wanted out. I met Margaret by the door. Up close, her expression was fierce but proud. "You've done well," she whispered. "They finally saw who you are." "And who they are," I answered. She nodded. "Tomorrow we'll sign the paperwork." I gave her a faint smile. "Make sure you rest tonight." She squeezed my arm lightly. "You too, child." As I walked out, the sound of heels and whispers trailed behind me. The night air hit my skin, warm, sharp, with the scent of cut grass and car exhaust. I looked back once through the glass wall, my parents frozen in the aftermath, Tara still kneeling, the pearl glinting under the chandelier. It didn't look like victory. It looked like release. A black sedan waited outside. Kayla leaned against it, arms crossed. So she asked. "It's over," I said. She opened the door. "Let's go home." As we drove off, the house shrank in the rearview mirror, its windows glowing like fading embers. My reflection overlapped with the skyline ahead, calm, steady, untouchable. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let the silence fill the space where their voices used to live. By morning, the video had gone viral. Someone had streamed the entire scene, the announcement, the refusal, the slap, and the moment my grandmother walked in. It spread across every platform with captions like, "Father slaps daughter over penthouse gift," and "Family party turns into public meltdown." Reporters camped outside my parents' house by noon. Dad's business partners withdrew from pending deals. Mom's charity board quietly asked her to step down. Tara's engagement evaporated overnight. Ethan's family released a statement about values and stability. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The world was saying everything for me. In my penthouse, morning light stretched across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Kayla scrolled through her phone, shaking her head. "They're trending, and not in a good way." I poured coffee, the smell filling the quiet. "They wanted attention," I said. "Now they have it." She looked up at me, cautious. "Do you feel better?" I thought about it. The ache on my cheek had faded into a ghost of heat. "No," I said. "Not better. Just done." A new email blinked on my screen from Grandma Margaret. Subject finalized. "Body, the paperwork is complete. Everything is under your name now. Rest." I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the stillness settle. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. That evening, the city glowed beneath my windows like a map of everything I'd survived. I stood there holding the pearl earring between my fingers, its smooth surface cool against my skin. Then I fastened it back into place. The reflection in the glass looked like someone I finally recognized. People think revenge is loud, that it burns and destroys. They're wrong. Real revenge is quiet. It's choosing yourself and never looking back. I picked up my phone, typed a message to Kayla, "Dinner tomorrow." She replied with a heart. I smiled. "If you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you," I whispered, "you're not alone."